Right now, Hasan is 33, or 34. He doesn't want to run for politics yet. Come back to me in 10 years. Hasan, okay, couple things here. First of all, I agree with the analysis, but I also think part of the way you win is a little bit of irrational optimism. If Ro Khanna was talking to me, I would say they need to end the war.
Mike. I don't know who you are. I don't know where you are. But your name wanna start changing your ways.
Ladies and gentlemen, he can't keep getting away with it. He can't keep getting away with it.
Ro Khanna, everybody, we got 50,000 people watching.
You always have
excited.
A lot of people watching.
Well, not always, but sometimes. So, thank you for doing this. How long do we have?
We got time. Right.
Okay. Because it's funny, because my manager, who is not like invested in politics at all, doesn't really know anything, was kind of like, I guess, telling everybody that that asked like to do interviews, you'd be like, oh yeah, they're going to talk about fiscal policy, they're going to talk about foreign policy, because he doesn't really know anything about politics. But is there anything that you specifically want to talk about today in terms of reaching out to the youth?
Jesus Christ. One thing I will say about Hasan is I think that listen, I'm playing the long game, chat. Right now, Hasan is 33, or 34. He doesn't want to run for politics yet. Come back to me in 10 years. Come back to me in 10 years. Chad is like 50. He's not reaching out to any youth. This is politics. If you're under the age of 50, you're young in politics. If you didn't know that, well, it's because you're not involved in politics. Give it up, Mike. He's not running. We'll see. He'll run for office so there'll be no more gaming ever. Why? You guys don't understand the future. I'm going to tell you what the future is. The future is politicians that do live streams. The future is politicians with huge, large parasocial fan bases. That's the future. It happened before with FDR. Why was FDR popular? Because he did the fireside chats. That was parasocial shit. That was the earliest. He would go on the radio and he would talk to people, and people would turn on the radio and they would listen to the president, and they would have a parasocial attachment to him. And he had a lot of fans all over the country because he did that. What did AMLO do? AMLO would do daily streams in Mexico. That's why he's got 60% approval rating. You guys are just, I mean, even AOC. Like, AOC is as popular and powerful as she is because she did so much social media. Donald Trump was elected because of Twitter. I don't think you guys are seeing the future. I see the future. And in my opinion, politicians that take advantage of new media and form parasocial fan bases are the ones that are going to prevail. And the ones that don't do that are not going to succeed. Anyway, let's keep going.
Talking to a younger audience. This is everyone's first DNC. This is my first DNC.
What's your first DNC?
It's my first time in Chicago. It's great. It's. I don't really like deep dish pizza.
You don't like deep dishes?
I
went
tried
to school
it
in Chicago.
I tried it.
Where did you go?
I went to Rutgers.
No, I mean into deep.
Oh, for deep dish. Where did we go last night?
You gotta give it one more try.
We. What is it? Lou's?
Lou's, yeah, Lou's are pretty good. You don't like it, huh?
No, it was not. I think thin crust is better.
Deep dish when I come to Chicago, but even if we disagree over pizza, that we can agree on policy.
Listen, if you go to New Jersey, if you're in Philadelphia, New York, or New Jersey, and you have pizza, you're not getting better pizza anywhere else. Okay? Like, no. That's where the Italians are. That's where they developed, like, pizza. So, like, he went to Rutgers. It's Jover. He's never going to be on the Midwest casserole. I see you sliding Philly. Philly is also a great pizza spot. I don't know what else to say. It's literally the East Coast. the mid-Atlantic pizza. That's where all the Italians caught off the fucking boat. That's where they live. That's where the best pizza is. Now, listen, as long as I don't consider deep dish pizza to be pizza and I think of it as like a different thing, I think of it Chicago style casserole. That's pretty good. Because I come into casserole with a different type of like mental model for what tastes good. And when I think about pizza, I'm thinking about a different type of experience. If I go in there thinking of deep dish as fucking pizza, then I'm going to not like it. Anyway, let's keep going.
Potentially. So actually, speaking of policy, are you, this is something I've been meaning to ask, but
Wet
there's a
pizza
meme.
is low-key good, though. Thin, crispy, slightly moist.
Called the Ro Khanna cycle. Are you familiar with this
I'm
meme?
familiar with it.
Okay, what do
think
you...
politicians don't know their own memes?
Do you see the memes that people post about you online?
I've seen the Ro Khanna cycle meme.
Okay, so what do you think about that?
I think it's...
What do you think? What do you think about the Ro Khanna cycle?
So I think it's fine. I think, look, people in politics, I'm not... I have ideas that are new and complex. I support innovation. I support entrepreneurship. I support technology. I support wealth generation. But I believe that wealth should be taxed and that we should have progressive policies of Medicare for all and free college. And so some people are like, well, how can he support policies of innovation and entrepreneurship but also be a progressive? And it's because I have this vision that you have to have both wealth generation and progressive policy. I am someone who believes deeply in human...
So what he's talking about, chat, is a type of politics we call social liberalism. Now, if you're a leftist, if you're not a social liberal, you may go, okay, yeah, I don't think what America needs is people advocating for capitalists at this point. What are you doing? Like, very clearly, our politics is too far to the right. So everybody already capitalists already have 1 million advocates for them. We don't need to, in our left-wing politics, spend any time going, entrepreneurship. They've got all these sycophants they need. We don't need that. We need people that are advocates for labor, advocates for the disenfranchised. So a social liberal like Ro Khanna will be like, well, I believe that we should also be advocating for entrepreneurship, and we need to have an engine of innovation. And it's like, bitch, shut up. Quiet down. And so we can work with them. If he'll vote for Medicare for all, great. If he'll vote for a whole bunch of policies that help the left, then great. And then I'm happy to work with you. Silicon Valley could have a far worse congressman than Ro Khanna, okay? If that's what Silicon Valley is putting out, that's fine. I also sometimes I talk about this type of politics as the left flank of capital. So like capitalists have two types of broad categories of politics. You have the exterminationist right of capital. They're the ones who believe that you can control labor via force, and that you should crush labor, that you should crush the proletariat. You should use the state in a rough-handed manner to force the workers in their place. So that's the right wing of capital. The left wing of capital believes that you should lower the temperature by giving reforms. That you should, if the left side of capital believes that capitalism will collapse, it's like a machine. And for the capitalist machine to continue, you need to actually have you have to have labor not pissed. And they think that the exterminationist capitalists are the ones that are going to cause a revolution that kills all capitalists. So the left hand of capital is like, well, we should give them food, we should give them housing, we should give them higher wages, we should redistribute some wealth, we should provide health care, we should, if we provide social democracy, then the worker will lower their hatred of us, and we'll get to keep our place at the top. We'll still be able to be wealthy. We'll still be able to be in control, but we will have a lower temperature of the politics. And yes, it's going to lower my wealth in an absolute sense, but relatively, I'll still be in power. So that's the left flank of capital and the right flank of capital. And then you have socialists who think we should abolish capitalists, that they are socially unnecessary. That our society should not be run by people who own the means of production, that the means of production should be owned in common, should be owned and controlled by the workers and the people that actually exist, not capitalists as a separate class. So when we're in the society we are today, obviously, if you believe in helping the working class, then you want to have more programs from the state that help the working class. So we can tactically work with somebody like Ro Khanna to get Medicare for all. But where we disagree with Ro Khanna is about the necessity of capitalists. Ro Khanna says capitalists provide, he has all the pro-capitalism arguments for why capitalists are good. And we don't believe those arguments. We're not persuaded by them. So that is the like functional difference between our politics, between somebody like Ro Khanna, a progressive, a social liberal. That's what that's called. I don't know if Ro would call himself a trade unionist or not. Trade unionism is a movement that unites social liberalism with socialism. Like, democratic socialism, some more light forms of socialism, like social democracy and shit like that. So that is kind of the politics of somebody like, Lula, Bernie Sanders, Melanchon, stuff like that. And then there's, you could go more left on that would be someone like Corbyn, Melanchon, right? And more right wing in that kind of like social democratic socialist, trade unionist movement. And then you have the real far left of revolutionary communists who want to fight a war now and say that all this stuff is pointless and you're never going to you're not going to convince the capitalists to abolish themselves. But the far left can still recognize that, hey, trade union consciousness creates helps their politics as well. I would say that I float between social Democrats / democratic socialists and revolutionary socialists. That's where I float between. I'm on the very, very left flank of democratic socialism in that I am skeptical of the idea that capitalists will allow themselves to be abolished. I think that we should use the state and get as many concessions as possible to help working class people and build up class consciousness. And then it'll get to a certain point of instability where people are like, why do we even need these capitalists? And the capitalists will panic and then we'll have a rupture. And then in which case we could abolish them. But that probably won't happen in my lifetime. That's how I think about politics. Which is we should do what's called non-reformist reforms. Reforms that make it the utter inanity of having capitalists more and more plain to more and more people. We should be like doing things that make the farce that is capitalism more ridiculous every day. And the idea that capitalists have some sort of special sauce more ridiculous every day. And that's what Ro Khanna, when he says entrepreneurship, when he talks about that, he's talking about capitalists having special sauce. It's like it's the mystical belief of those that still support capitalism. And that's what puts Ro Khanna fundamentally on the other side of a very important line. Okay, this is a very good question that I want to get into, which is, what is a state? According to Marxist theory, a state is the instrument of class domination. The end goal of communism is a stateless, classless, moneyless society. So in other words, you won't need a state if there are no classes. But what is the process by which we become stateless? But some people think state means government programs. So like a government that exists with representatives that do things and, take resources and redistribute the resources. I don't call that a state. I call that governance. We will always have governance. Anarchists are against governance. Socialists are not. Like, for example, even in my socialist utopia, there's going to be child protective services. In my socialist utopia, there's going to be a nuclear regulatory commission. In my socialist utopia, there's going to be a environmental protection monitoring and agency. In my socialist utopia, there's going to be universities, but there's not going to be class repression required. There's going to be public safety. If somebody rapes someone, we're not just going to, assume that there's going to be a spontaneous fucking response. We're going to have people that protect rape victims. This is my socialist. So there's going to be governance. There's just not going to be class domination. Do you understand what I mean? So like when we say there's not going to be a state, we mean there's not going to be a class dominating another class because we're going to have abolished social class and economic class. American politics is this way because of the Electoral College. We have to do our coalition building prior to the election. In other countries, they don't have an Electoral College, so they do their coalition building after the election. So, for example, in Spain or Portugal, you have a communist party, you have a socialist party, you have a liberal party, you have a conservative party, you have a fascist party. Then you have an election. Then everybody looks at the votes and they go, okay, no, none of these parties have a majority in the legislature. So the Socialist Party goes to the Communist Party and says, hey, will you work with us on this policy and this policy and this policy? If you do, I will put the communists in charge of health and human services and the environmental protection as a part of my cabinet. And the communists go and meet among themselves and they go, okay, do we want to work with the socialists on these policies and will we join their government or will we not? And they do a negotiation. And then the liberals come to the socialists and the liberals say, well, we'll work with you on this policy and on this policy. And the Greens come to the socialists and say, we'll work with you on this policy and we'll work on this with you on this policy. In exchange, we'll vote for you to be the prime minister. That's how it works overseas. In America, we have an electoral college, so you can't do it that way. We have to form our coalitions prior to the election. That is why our country sucks, because we are not allowed to differentiate ourselves enough from liberalism. We're not allowed to offer a different program and have people vote on those programs. And we have to win within this internal party politic bullshit. Now, I am an advocate for massive electoral and constitutional reform so that we don't have to do it that way. So the question you have to ask yourself is, do you care about electoral politics? Is electoral politics relevant to the world? And I have to say, absolutely, it clearly is. Do you think Bernie Sanders, if he had won in 2020, would have done the same thing that Joe Biden is doing in Israel right now? The answer is no. If you think the answer is yes, you're wrong, and we can't have a productive conversation. Do I consider myself more left than Hasan? My answer to that question is, who cares? Even if I do consider myself more left than Hasan, in what way is it relevant to what we're doing? The answer is no. The answer is no. I probably do consider myself more left than Hasan. Who cares? Who fucking cares? Is he my ally and friend? Do I support what he's doing? Yes. Do I criticize him or when I feel that it's warranted? Yes. Am I ever going to change? No. I don't even think that's drama bait. I just think that I think that could be a legitimate question. And this is how you should answer it. You should stop thinking about politics like that. Stop thinking about politics about like, who am I? I'm more left than this person. I'm not more left than this person. Stop thinking about politics like that. That is liberal bullshit. You're thinking about politics as a expression of personal moralism. You're thinking about it as some sort of expression of personal branding or something. Oh, Mike thinks that he is 0.3 degrees more left than Hasan according to the brand builder tracking app. Who gives a fuck? Who gives a fuck? You should be taking political actions with goals in mind. And you should be able to articulate how your goals are going to be achieved. If you are not taking political action with a goal and a demand and a way that it can be achieved, then you're just wasting your time and your breath. Okay, all in all, there you go. That's what I ask you to do. Is I think that when people get really mad at AOC or really mad at me or really mad at Hasan and say they're being a sellout on whatever issue it is, that is such a liberal conception of the world. It's like focused on this like selling out thing, selling out. You're either a sellout or you're not a sellout. And it's like, actually be specific. What are you asking them to do that they're not doing? What would that do to help what goal is that you are trying to achieve? Why would them doing what you say they should do achieve that goal? Like AOC should not have spoke out at the Democratic National Convention, and she should have gone out on the streets and called Kamala Harris genocide Kamala, and that would result in Kamala Harris breaking from Joe Biden. Like what is the thing that you think she should have done, and what would the consequences have been? And why is it something that you think that if she doesn't do, she's now a sellout? I think what's happening is people have a parasocial connection to these people, and they're like, I want them to achieve the outcomes that I want, and they're the person who's in charge of giving me the outcomes that I want, and I'm not getting the outcomes that I want. Therefore, I'm mad at the people that I think are the closest to me for not giving me what I want. That is, what kind of politics would you call that? Infantile.
That we should have progressive policies of Medicare for all and free college. And so some people are like, well, how can he support policies of innovation and entrepreneurship but also be a progressive? And it's because I have this vision that you have to have both wealth generation and progressive policy. I am someone who believes deeply in human rights and believe deeply in.
Do I think Kamala Harris mentions a ceasefire in her street? Yes. I think Kamala Harris will say we should have a ceasefire in Gaza now. That's what she's going to say.
For human rights because of my grandfather, who spent 4 years in jail and part of Gandhi's independence movement. And yet I have a very hopeful and aspirational vision for America, that we can get there, and a pragmatic vision of how we get there. And so some people say, okay, are these contradictory? But I think people who are at the edge of interesting contradictions are helping shape new ideas. It doesn't mean they're always right, but I embrace that.
Okay, let me ask you something about the wealth tax. I agree with you, and I do think that there's nothing inherently wrong with wealth generation. I guess like there's something a little bit wrong with the way that people generate wealth in terms of the extraction of surplus labor value, but we don't even need to get into that. What I want to ask specifically is the idea that people claim that a wealth tax is completely impossible. What do you say to those people?
Just not true. I mean, if you tax, well, first of all, why not try it to say before you say it's impossible? What's going to happen?
Maybe we do already try it. Property taxes, right?
Yeah, exactly. And 93% of wealth is in America. So what are they going to do? Are they going to take their money and put it in China? Come on. They're not going to take their money and put it in India. They're going to pay the tax. And what are they going to buy all artwork? I mean, no, they're not. They're still going to have a lot of things in assets and property and cars and stocks. And yeah, there's going to be some amount that you won't be able to tax, but that's an administrative problem that can be fixed, and you're going to be able to generate a fair amount of revenue based on that. You should also have a tax on financial transactions, of stock transactions, that a lot of other countries do. You should have a step up in basis. When you want to give your money to your kids or your grandkids, they should have to pay for the appreciation that's happened in your stock. Right now you can buy a stock at $100, it goes to $1,000, you give it to your kids, and they don't have to pay that entire capital appreciation. So there are things we can do that allow people to build wealth, but then tax it so that everyone has health care, child care. You know what the biggest challenge, Hasan, in my view in this country right now is people who are drowning in debt. You talk to 20 and 30-year-olds. They're drowning in debt because of education, because they, like me, I took out $80,000, $90,000 of loans, but it became like $160,000 because of all the interest. You kept having to pile it on. They're drowning in debt because of educational loans. They're drowning in debt because of credit card, and it's charging 30% interest. And they're drowning in debt sometimes because of medical bills. That's crazy when you have my district producing more wealth in one zip code than has ever been produced in the history of humanity.
Speaking of your district, actually, what do you think is going on with the tech bro?
So by the way, chat, right there is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Would a tax on wealth be socialist? So people would say yes, people would say no, and the answer to that question is that is an irrelevant question. The question is, how does it I guess the greater question is, does it redistribute power and wealth away from capitalists? Would a wealth tax redistribute wealth and power away from capitalists? And the answer is yeah. So that we would call that a non-reformist reform. You're taking wealth away from capitalists. Therefore, they have less power over economy, less power over the society. You're redistributing that wealth to who? The masses. Thereby increasing their wealth, increasing their position, increasing the quality of their lives, giving them more power over their own lives, taking power away from capital. So that seems to be a pretty good idea. We should support that idea. Does it dismantle capitalism? No. Does that make it not worth doing? Absolutely not. And if you look at politics like, well, that's not dismantling capitalism, That is a silly way of looking at politics.
Mentality that I feel like for a long time, a lot of the tech evangelists were firmly committed.
Are you saying that asking whether a wealth tax is socialist is like asking whether you or Hasan is more left wing, i.e. it doesn't fucking matter? Yes. It's not an adult way of looking at politics. It's a childlike way of looking at politics. Is a wealth tax socialist? Who cares? Will it make capitalists less powerful? Yes. Therefore, we should support it. It's a good idea.
Committed, it seems, to the Democratic Party, and I feel as though there's a little bit of a change. You got the All In podcast, those guys, and many of these like entrepreneurs who are now finding themselves in the throes of the Republican Party more and more. Do you have an opinion on that? Do you know why that's happening? I personally think, not a big fan of a lot of the tech giants in general. I assumed that they were always Republican, and now they're more open about it. But, was there a genuine ideological shift in Silicon Valley in your assessment?
There has been a slight shift. I mean, 2/3 of people are still supporting the Democrats, but it used to probably be 4/5. So there has been some movement, and the people who are not supporting Democrats are louder. There are a number of reasons. One is something where I think the party should correct. I think we've been unnecessarily hostile to Bitcoin and some of the digital assets, and we can debate whether they have innovation.
Wrong. Those speculative tokens are garbage, and they don't produce value for society. Just because there's a lot of speculative value in them now, it's all based on the idea that the government will prop them up. Fuck Bitcoin, fuck crypto. It's dumb as fuck. It's worthless.
In financial instruments, but at the very least, they're a currency that a lot of people around the world use.
For what? Where? Who uses it?
In authoritarian nations.
No, they don't.
In nations with inflation, and we
Wrong.
shouldn't be as negative on it. So that's created some negative vibes, and those folks tend to be loud. Then there are folks who are younger in Silicon Valley, many of the PayPal guys, and they don't believe in the state having a positive role. And I think that's just.
I think they don't believe in the state, period.
Yeah, and that's just a misunderstanding of history. Because Tesla was funded by Obama. SpaceX was supported by Ash Carter. The Silicon Valley came into existence because of Kennedy's call to go to the moon and NASA buying semiconductors. So there's a misunderstanding of history and the role that the state has played in allowing for innovation, and we've got to do a better job in making that case.
Yeah, let's talk about Elon Musk. What do you think about him being, in virtually every industry? Tesla was not only, it's not just SpaceX, which is an offshoot of NASA. It's like a privatization initiative that normally was handled by the state originally, right? So it takes a lot of government subsidies. I would say that, what's Elon Musk's internet service? Starlink, which now he also has Starshield, I guess, which is like the more defense contractor side. That's, again, defense contracting, so that's still state subsidies in that regard. But more importantly, Tesla's green energy initiatives, or not Tesla's green energy initiatives, but as you mentioned, Obama's green energy initiatives and like credit swaps kept Tesla afloat at a time when he was damn near bankruptcy, which maybe we should have let him be bankrupt. But and now he's out here talking about how the government is overspending, that the government is spending far too much money, using this like ridiculous reactionary right-wing and somewhat populist sentiment to try to engage with the average person as though he is not taken in billions of dollars and have generated this immense wealth as a direct consequence of government subsidies. Why do you think he's made this dramatic shift to the right?
Well, I'm going to recommend that he comes on your podcast.
His baby mama was on my podcast back in the day, Grimes. We keep in touch sometimes, but I don't think he's too fond of me.
Well, I think if he believes in speech, you should have a conversation.
I don't think he believes in speech.
I think that would be fascinating. It would get a lot of attention. But look, I think that I made this case directly to him. I know him. I've gone on his spaces or Twitter spaces, and I've said that the role of the state is critical to the economic engines in your companies, but also in Silicon Valley in general. And look, is there waste and duplication in government? Of course there is. And you can talk about having more efficiency in government while recognizing the role.
We need to massively expand our government. Our government has been getting smaller for decades and decades and decades. You'll know our politics has actually started to turn a corner when we have more federal employees rather than less. We need to have a hell of a lot more of a government. We need to have a government that's 3 times the size that it is now.
Government, but we've got to persuade people like Elon. He said, he had voted for Obama twice, and I think that we can still make the case to people about why the Democratic Party in government is better for innovation, for job creation, and maybe some of them are going to be lost, but I'm hopeful that others will see the light.
Do you feel like it's too much short-term thinking, like immediate profits, trying to max out the earnings every quarter instead of like having like a bold agenda for the future that requires maybe a little bit of government funded research and larger government initiatives overall?
I certainly think that short-termism has taken place in this country, which is why we've had the hollowing out of research and development budgets. We've had the hollowing out of investment in the country, and the government can take more long-term bets on things like the mRNA vaccine, on things like GPS, on things like the internet. There's a reason that those were funded by the government, because they weren't subject to short-term quarterly profits. And what has made America work in the past has been the combination of the two. The government funding fundamental research, fundamental science, the government funding the scaling of key industries and communities, and the private sector also innovating to commercialize, because you don't want a Soviet-like war economy where everything is being done by the government and you don't have any consumer goods. So it's the combination that has made America work.
Okay. Agree to disagree on certain aspects of that, but let's switch gears a little bit and talk about, I guess, war instead of the war economy. There is, it seems, especially in my generation, a genuine disconnect with the way that voters feel about American foreign policy and the way that politicians react to American foreign policy. I wanted to ask you a little bit about, obviously there's protests happening outside of the DNC in terms of demanding a ceasefire in Gaza. Why do you think there is such a disconnect?
One, I think there isn't a full understanding of the history of the region. As someone who has studied British colonialism,
this is why this is a pretty good part, I think. Like Ro Khanna talking about how Israel is clearly a colonial project of the British Empire is not something that you hear that often from a congressperson.
British colonized India, they colonized Ireland, they got rid of all the textile industry in India and Ireland, and after the Ottoman Empire, they established a colonial rule over large parts of the Middle East, including Egypt and including what is now Palestine. And the Balfour Declaration was the original sin there, where, yes, we had Jewish self-determination, which I believe in Jewish homeland, but the Palestinians were only given civil and religious rights. They weren't given political self-determination. And that was a British problem. And then from 1936 to 1939, the British, through armed violence, suppressed a lot of the Palestinian self-determination. And I just think that history isn't fully known or taught in America. And what I believe is that we need to recognize Palestinian self-determination for a Palestinian state, and recognize Jewish self-determination and the right of Israel to exist as a secure nation. And if you come with that framework, which I believe is rooted in justice, then you say, okay, we look at this conflict, and Netanyahu, we can't just continue to have a blank check to Netanyahu, and he is not coming to the table on peace. We need to put pressure on Hamas, and we are putting pressure and should put pressure and condemn their atrocity on October 7th. But we also need to put pressure on Netanyahu. And instead, what is happening is usually our administration goes there, and then we basically provide cover for Netanyahu adding terms, and we say that he's accepted it, and Hamas doesn't, and nothing, and people keep dying.
So that you actually brought up a really interesting point, because this has just happened. There was Axios reporting that just came out that Anthony Blinken, in the latest round of talks, again did the same exact thing that you just mentioned, which is to claim that Hamas actually is sullying the terms and conditions of the deal, a ceasefire proposal that America had proposed that said it was Israel's own proposal, where obviously Israel killed the principal negotiator on the Palestinian side a couple weeks prior to that. And Anthony Blinken just yesterday said, oh no, Benjamin Netanyahu agreed to the deals of this proposal. And then it came out during this, like literally in the past 24 hours that no, Benjamin Netanyahu had not agreed to the terms and conditions of the proposal once again. I personally fear, I do not want another Trump presidency. And I personally fear that, electorally speaking, obviously I think it's unconscionable. I consider what Israel is doing to be a genocide. I'm very open about that. I consider Israel, alongside all of these human rights groups from Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and Israeli human rights groups like dsaL, to be an apartheid state even when it's not conducting offensive operations in Gaza. Having said that, however, beyond all of that, I think that there's the morality of the situation, which I think is unconscionable, but then there's also the electoral consequences of leaving someone like Benjamin Netanyahu, who is right-wing, who is very right-wing, who is aligned with Donald Trump. There's other reporting coming out now that he might even have private conversations, private correspondences about this ceasefire negotiation with Donald Trump directly. Leaving that out on the table without, while we have an election coming up, is, I think, leaving too many cards on the table for a foreign actor to potentially end up changing the trajectory of the American election in a pretty significant way. Do you feel like the Democrats are seeing that as a reasonable threat in terms of like what Benjamin Netanyahu might be able to do that would potentially lead America into war as well, into this conflict directly? Do you feel like within the caucuses there is like a genuine perceived threat of such a reality?
Well, I agree with you on the danger of Netanyahu. I would use different language in characterizing Israel. I mean, what I believe is that Israel is illegally occupying the West Bank.
So this is what liberal Zionism is. Now you're seeing what liberal Zionism is, which is basically they're going to try to say, hey, Israel has the right to exist, but what they're doing in Gaza and West Bank is wrong and illegal, and we should focus on the Netanyahu. And this is stale. It doesn't work anymore. And the reason why it doesn't work anymore is because Israeli politics has seen that Israel has gotten away with stealing all the land and stealing and mistreating the Palestinians, and that America hasn't held them to account and the world hasn't held them to account. So all the right wingers who are like, see, we could do the settlements, we could do the genocide, and we can get away with it, and you'll have more land, are winning. So this like liberal fecklessness, this like liberal Zionism of like, oh, we should have the 67 borders, blah, 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 two-state solution isn't working anymore because Israelis and the Israeli polity thinks they can act with impunity
in Gaza, and that that occupation is illegal. But I've been to Israel. I think Israel should exist as a secure state, and that Israel is an ally. But we should be against the occupation. We should be for a two-state solution, and we should recognize a Palestinian state and be one of the 143 countries around the world that does that, which in itself would be a bold policy. So while I don't use some of the language you do, I would just a disagreement. I am quite progressive on the issue, and I was one of 37 Democrats who voted against a blank check and giving offensive aid to Netanyahu because of the concerns of human rights. And I have no love for Hamas. I think they have been engaged in brutal terrorism, but I don't think that the solution is militarily possible if eradication of Hamas. What Netanyahu is trying to do is not achievable.
A reality that Defense Minister Yoav Gallant also has admitted, recognized. It's seemingly only Benjamin Netanyahu, Itamar Ben-Gvir, and Bezalel Smotrich that are refusing to recognize that reality, that Hamas is not a military solution, but it's a political one.
What we should have done is listen to our allies, the Gulf allies, the Saudis, Jordan, Egypt, and participated in a summit on the future of Palestine and brought in Palestinian civil society, brought in Israel, Egypt, and say, how do we work towards a two-state solution that is an alternative to the governance structure of Hamas? But the first thing we need to do is bring an end to the war. And what Netanyahu's condition that he wanted, which is to have a continued presence of Israeli troops on the border of Egypt, that's not just opposed by Hamas, that's also opposed by Egypt. And so my view is that we need to pressure Hamas through diplomacy in Qatar, through diplomacy with Egypt, through.
By the way, this is like a really important point that like this is the reality that Ro Khanna is talking about. Is like Israel is out of control and Joe Biden isn't reining them in. That's the crisis that we're all facing
with Iran to make sure that Hamas is releasing the hostages, but we also need to put some pressure on Netanyahu, because otherwise Netanyahu can continue to defy the United States if there's not a ceasefire, and if Iran engages in any kind of retaliation for the assassination of Hamas's political leader, then you'll risk the start of a broader war in the Middle East, and that's a big risk. With
The potential of American troops also being deployed in the region with carriers all surrounding the Arabian Peninsula at this moment.
Exactly, and Lindsey Graham's already cheerleading for a war in Iran, and Netanyahu would want nothing more than to drag us into a war against Hezbollah and Iran, which I vehemently oppose. So I think that this is a time, Mehdi Hasan has written about it, that we need a pivot from Vice President Harris. I'm glad that they're engaging, but we need a pivot like Hubert Humphrey had in the Vietnam War. The problem is Humphrey did it in October, and if Humphrey had done it in September, he may have won. But Vice President Harris should give a speech. Here is how my vision is going to differ on the Middle East. And that speech should be about not just a permanent ceasefire and a release of hostages, but making it clear that we're going to uphold the Leahy law, that the State Department is going to uphold international law, and that Netanyahu's not going to get a blank check, and that Netanyahu has really defied the administration, and that we're going to hold both sides accountable for ending the violence that is making Israel less secure, that is making the hostage families less secure.
Yeah, no, that's great.
By the way, that's obviously the moderate position that the Democratic Party not pursuing is fucking insane.
Do you feel like there is a real hurdle in terms of what Kamala Harris can say versus what kind of pressure she could potentially apply internally, as she is still currently a part of the Biden administration as the vice president?
I think the biggest way to get a shift is to make a speech about it, or to do an interview with you. I mean,
I agree.
And then that she is the nominee.
Oh my goodness gracious. This is actually the second time I've heard this. Can somebody find me the clip? The senator from Michigan said that she should do this as well.
And the Vice President Harris showed that there are some differences, or at least distinctions, between her policy when it comes to the Middle East and Gaza with President Biden.
Well, it shows that she's her own person. She thinks her own way.
She ought to do that, you think?
Yes, she is going to be our next president, and she has to start telling folks this is where she comes from, what she believes in. And that's going to be natural. So there's going to be things that she agrees. There's going to be things you don't agree.
And when it comes to Michigan, though, you think it's important for her to show that distinction on her views toward Gaza with President Biden?
Yeah, if she has those views, she has to be clear about whatever those views are. She'll have to make.
Doesn't she?
Yeah, and I think she has differences,
yeah.
And she'll talk about it. Back to authenticity. Be who you are.
Yeah.
Be what's in your gut. Tell us what motivates you, what drives you. People want to see that.
Will you convey to her at some point in the next couple of weeks that she ought to do that?
Yes. Oh, if I have a chance to, yeah.
I'm sure you will. Do you think it's important the Vice President?
I think one of the big crises of the Democratic Party is people all kind of like leaning in, like, say it, but also not wanting to be confrontational. That's the reality that we have. Which is like, everybody's like, yeah, you should say that.
She has extraordinary power now in the administration. I think that would push the administration in the right direction. And so that is what I have said publicly. That is what I've said privately. And I say that not just because it's about an election. It's about human lives. I've got people in my district who have had 16, 17 people and their families killed in Gaza. I've also had people who had family or friends killed on the October 7th attack. And what I want is for this violence to end. And what I want is for a shift in foreign policy. Anyone who thinks that this foreign policy of ours has been successful when we've had a war for 11 months, 40,000 people dying, is just wrong. There's no historian who's going to think, yeah, that was great policy. It's obviously been a failure.
Yeah.
We have to wrap on this space because it's reserved at
Okay.
7:15, but if you want to continue, walk.
Okay, we can do that. You want to walk and talk?
Walk and dog works.
All right, let's do it. This space is cool.
We should go down this way.
So what do you do for fun?
I spend time with my kids.
Do you work out?
I swim and I go on walks. That's my form of workout. But I don't go. I used to when I was younger go hit the gym, but that has.
You're kind of tall. You don't ball?
Huh?
You don't ball?
I used to. I don't.
I don't know where we're going. This way? We're gonna go this way.
He's trying to get Ro Khanna in the
You
pickup
work
game.
out? You look like you work out.
I work out a little bit. Excuse me.
A little bit. 7 days a fucking week. A little bit.
Which way are we going? Down?
7 days a fucking week. Little bit.
Who's your favorite Republican congressperson?
I like Mike Gallagher. He just left Congress.
Okay, it's a safe pick. Someone who just retired.
I'm trying to think of someone who's there right now. Brian Fitzpatrick is a good guy.
This way.
He's
No. Why are Democrats like this? Why do Democrats fall for this moderate bullshit propaganda? I feel like I feel like Harris is a politician without any real convictions who just follows the party line or what's becoming popular, but maybe I'm wrong. I would say that that is not too far off, but following what's popular would be a revelation. Because Americans want left-wing policy, but they never get it. So if you had a politician who actually followed what was popular, America would go to the left.
He represents my hometown of Bucks County. I've done a lot of builds with him. Those are two at the top of my head. I work a lot with Todd Young. He's a senator from Indiana. We've done bills on chips and signs.
Who's your favorite Democrat? Who's your favorite Democratic congressperson?
I like Jamie Raskin. He's really thoughtful.
Okay.
He's cerebral. He understands a lot of history.
I feel like a lot of people like him.
Yeah.
He's a nice guy.
Who's your favorite, other than me?
I don't know. Who's my favorite?
It's gotta be Rashida. It's Rashida.
Maybe.
It's gotta be Rashida.
I really like Ilhan Omar. I like Rashida Tlaib. I like AOC. I like the whole squad. Yeah. Bernie, of course, as well.
Where are you? Are you all in on Harris, or are you waiting and seeing? Or where are you?
I'm waiting and seeing. I would say that, is there a quieter area that we can go to specifically, like maybe not as cluttered? Because we're right in the gate. Oh, you have to leave?
In like 5 minutes.
No, it's all good. If you guys gotta go, it's fine. Yeah, that might be a little bit better.
So you want to just go into the lobby?
Yeah, the elevator lobby might be better, yeah.
Oh, Hasan, you were getting something interesting.
You asked how I feel about Harris. Am I like fully in the tank? No, I would like to, I think that the Democratic Party, I'm very critical of the Democratic Party at times. And I think that
They got to do a ceasefire.
I think that they've done a bunch of things that are
They got to do a ceasefire.
very, very different than how the Democratic Party normally operates. I feel like one of the biggest issues that I have is that they run scared. Like the Dems oftentimes they run scared. They're very afraid of being called a radical.
Okay, god damn it. Hasan, they got to do a ceasefire. Give him something to communicate easily. Be like, I think a lot of left-wing people would jump on board if they got a ceasefire. Just say that. That's what I would say. If Ro Khanna was talking to me, I would say they need to end the war. If they ended the war, they would run away with it. Everybody would jump on board. They saw what Tim Walz did in Minnesota. They're excited about that. And if they got a ceasefire, then people wouldn't feel like they were aiding and abetting a genocide and they could jump on board. But if they don't do that, then all of us are going to hang back because we cannot support a genocide. That's what I would say to Ro Khanna. I would say that promise to do what they did in Minnesota and stop the genocide, and people would jump on board to stop Trump. But that you know, maybe do a couple things, like maybe talk about a public option for healthcare. Talk about raising the minimum wage. Talk about public transit and high-speed rail. Some of those things I think would all be really good and exciting stuff. At public housing, social housing. Those are the things, popular things.
They're very afraid of progressive policies, or like signing their name on progressive policies. And I think when Republicans run the narrative of crime hysteria, when they run the narrative of immigration panic, I think that's pretty successful. And Democrats don't usually counter narrative against that. And then of course you leave a lot of falsehoods on the table when you don't counter message against that. And then all of a sudden polls reflect that reality. And Dems love focus testing.
How would you counter message on crime and immigration?
Easy. Look at the data. Crime's at an all-time low. The minor blip that happened in crime mostly focused on homicides, and it was a one-off. It of course immediately went away. Now it's down 40% in places like Philadelphia. So and even at that time, people were, that's a fact, use facts to address the made-up hysteria from Republicans. These are falsehoods. They're running on complete falsehoods. They're running on emotional anecdotes. And obviously, when you see a lot of homelessness, you think, oh, that's crime. That's a criminal. Like immediately, that's how people personalize the crime that they're experiencing, when in fact, like, there is no organized retail theft. The notion that local news and national networks were running on organized retail theft while...
Okay, listen, I get it. I agree with all these things. It's not that I disagree with Hasan. I just know how politicians are. This is the thing. I would look Ro Khanna in the face and I'd be like, go on offense. She's been doing it. Keep doing that. And get a ceasefire in Gaza. That's what you need to give them, something they can spit out in like 5 seconds. Ceasefire in Gaza now, and the left will jump on board. That's what you need to say. Now, is that totally true? Who gives a fuck? I don't know what's going to make people jump on board. I just know that I can't support her with a genocide. So I want the genocide to stop. That's my number one issue right now. Stop the genocide. I think they've done a great job in the campaign so far. If you want my evaluation of the Kamala Harris, Tim Walz campaign, I think it's the best campaign I've seen in my entire life. However, the genocide in Gaza is such a huge problem that it's weighing them down. So they need to save the Palestinian people from the genocide that Joe Biden is doing, and then people can say, then they could jump on board and give her credit. But if they are cowardly on that, then we're not going to. Like, obviously, Bernie Sanders' campaign in 2016 was my favorite campaign of all time. But as far as general election campaigns, this is the best one in my life. It's better than Obama. It's better than Clinton. It's better than Biden. It's better than Hillary. It's clearly the best one. Now, I want to see more policies. But I think they've done a good job of laying out some good policy. The few policies they talked about openly have been strong. So it leads me to believe that they're going to be strong. So I'm giving them credit. Again, they've only been running for a month.
showing National Retailers Association numbers on shrink when shrink was only going up, adjusted to more foot traffic, more people going out and shopping.
Hasan is
was
doing
ridiculous.
autistic.
That was something that they could have
He's
easily
doing
addressed.
autistic info dump, and I totally understand it because this is me.
And instead,
I guess
they did
they're
not
paying
do
for
that.
me today.
And I would say we, during the red wave that didn't really happen, but it
I
turned
just
into a
got
red flood,
fired
things
as a
like
chef?
in places like New York, focusing Democrats leaning on that crime narrative and that crime hysteria actually
Honestly,
led
go
to
talk to that
worse results
lawyer
for the
again and be
Democratic
like, they fired me for this. Like, what the fuck?
Party
Quinn
in
Corvo, they give the
comparison to other
5-1s.
places.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, like outside, like right here?
Yeah, and they'll let us right back.
Okay, yeah. And I think that at the time I was, sorry. My uncle, I know, you know him,
Yeah,
Cenk.
Cenk, yeah.
So he got swept away by the crime narratives. Like he became pretty, in my opinion, reactionary. We debate all the time about this stuff, especially on Thanksgiving. I call it Janksgiving. He comes over, we debate on issues that we disagree on. And at the time I kept trying to be like, no, look at the data, like you're wrong. There is no like organized retail theft happening. There's no like progressive DAs that are, letting criminals off the hook or anything like that. And I think Larry Krasner, all things considered, not being kicked out, even though they undemocratically tried to push him out in Philadelphia, and then the murder rate going down, homicide rates going down in Philadelphia is a perfect response and a perfect example.
Doing your homework and knowing your facts. I think.
That's what I want. I want Democrats to just like
Just
address
like
the
immigrants
truth.
don't commit more crimes than those who are native born.
Thank you. Exactly.
By the way,
idea
chat.
that like immigrants are doing unimaginable crimes on a regular basis. Donald Trump says at his rallies that hundreds of thousands of Americans are being murdered by immigrants every year. That is an abject lie. The actual data shows that it's 23 homicides per year that undocumented migrants commit.
Is that the case?
23. In the fiscal year 2024 so far, 23 homicides have been committed by undocumented migrants. How insane. And then he tries to pair that up by saying, and Republicans do this all the time, fast and loose with data. They play fast and loose all the time. They say, oh, what about the fentanyl deaths? 90% of the drugs that are crossing the southern border, or just all of American borders, are apprehended at regular points of entry. That's the Department of Homeland Security's own data, right? That's border apprehensions, right? They're not actually coming in the pockets of like otherwise law-abiding abuelas.
What about the other
from
10% though?
Yeah, okay, that's a great concept, but like that's not how you write policy, right? It's like saying, okay, 23 too many murders, right? Like you could say that, but ultimately there's 10,000 plus homicides happening in this country. Like it would be like your house is on fire and you're you're worried about the color of the curtains. You know what I mean? Like it's a minor aspect of a major.
Okay, I think that Hasan, if we're a politician, we would need to talk about this. Every single murder is a tragedy. Every single murder should be investigated. Only 23 murders is not a good way of talking about it for a politician. But saying that what you should do is talk in percentages. You should be like 0.01% of homicides were done by undocumented immigrants. This guy wants to focus on there are millions and millions of otherwise law-abiding people who just want to be here to work a job and they want to follow the rules. And Joe Biden, and Donald Trump want to deport people because of their race. Donald Trump thinks Mexicans are criminals, and that's fucked up. You need to go on offense. You need to be making accusations and attacks.
Problem. So it's just pure Republican hysteria, hyper-focusing on migrants, and then lying about this situation by
you shouldn't be
hyper-focusing on.
dismissive of any homicide, because that'll be clipped and people will get emotional.
Progressives are going to emerge as a big force in the next 10 years in American politics.
I don't know if the progressives will emerge as a big force in the next 10 years in American politics. I have no idea.
You got to keep growing. You'll get a big platform.
I think overall, I try to do what I can. I care a lot about labor unions. I care about building different forms of organizing to ensure that even if the Democratic Party is not always going to have your best interests in mind, you can at least force them. You can create like additional pressure valves to ensure that they do things, because ultimately this is a democracy and people do have to, like our elected representatives have to respond to the pressure.
But we have progressives who are pushing for policies on a living wage, Medicare for all, free college, getting people out of debt, the medical debt, the student debt, the credit card debt, and more importantly on a just foreign policy, which I think we will move towards. I mean, more and more, 37 of us voted against the offensive weapons to Netanyahu. There's a greater understanding that we've got to have a move towards peace and not overseas wars, and that Iraq was a colossal mistake, and that we don't want to get into a war with Iran.
I know, but I think ultimately American foreign policy is too deeply tied to the defense contractors. So in that regard, it's very difficult, I feel like. There's always bipartisanship. There's always bipartisan consensus on American foreign policy.
Hasan, okay, a couple things here. First of all, I agree with the analysis, but I also think part of the way you win is a little bit of irrational optimism. You have to have some irrational optimism to win. What Ro is saying is it would have been 0 people voting against giving money to Israel. Now we have 37. That's a big change. I think the vast majority of Americans do not support what's going on in Gaza, who do not want, who if you ask them about giving weapons and military equipment to Israel, will be against it. We have made inroads. We have made progress. Yes, American foreign policy is currently bipartisan, but that's because people are not involved on it. And but there are disagreements within American foreign policy. I think there's been kind of a flattening of the disagreements between the different wings of the empire's administration. There are a lot of doves, man. There are a lot of people who don't want us to go to wars. There are a lot of people who do not think that we should be attacking Iran. There are a lot of people who think that we should be having more diplomacy with Venezuela and Cuba, and we shouldn't be interfering in Latin America. There are a lot of people like that. Even in the Democratic Party. Yes, if you're focused on never Trumpers and Republicans, you're going to see the most depraved lunatics in the planet. But we need more irrational optimism.
I don't know. I just don't think that Americans also, by and large, care about foreign policy all too much. Even with respect to Israel and Palestine, it's at the forefront of a lot of people's minds, but ultimately they won't make...
Never say
I think
this.
the Democratic Party...
I couldn't disagree more.
And the Republicans both rely on people not making an electoral calculation on that, on a foreign policy. But as you mentioned with LBJ, foreign policy is not usually top of mind until it becomes the only thing that people care about. And I think leaving so much of this conversation in the hands of Netanyahu with the bear hug strategy is a genuinely, like, I can't comprehend it. Like, I think it's a genuinely scary prospect.
Yeah.
Both a scary prospect from, the continuation of Israel's offensive siege in Gaza, which is, completely unacceptable, but also genuinely scary because there is a capacity to open up a multiple front war here, and that would require American troops.
Well, that's what needs to be avoided, and that's why we need a pivot.
Yeah.
And, but I think that progressives like me calling for that and voting that way and trying to shift the policy, and I'm hopeful that the vice president will do it. I think it'll be helpful for her in reestablishing trust with the hundreds of thousands of voters she'll need, not just in Michigan, but in a lot of these battleground states.
Yeah, we'll see. I hope. I mean, I'm waiting to see something from the Harris ticket that shows that, but I think that a deviation on foreign policy requires genuine ideological commitment, an ideological commitment to peace.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think that Kamala Harris wants to win, and I like that. I think that's good. I hope that they make that calculation and choose to do the right thing in that regard. But I think people want assurances.
I understand that. There are too many people who have died, and for me, it's personal, given my grandfather's history with colonialism, that we have a just recognition of the Palestinian self-determination in addition to a secure Israel. And I look forward to continuing this conversation in the months and years ahead, because I think you're a very important progressive voice, even where we don't see always eye to eye, and you may not always agree with me. I think that we're moving. We've got to have more open conversation, honest conversation, and we've got to move this country in a direction that recognizes that so many people have been left out economically, and that has a more just foreign policy.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you.
Don't forget. Let me get that off you.
Yes.
So
I found the video where I
constant gains, and you were right there.
Oh, good.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
No idea who Mike is.
Mike. I don't know who you are. I don't know where you are. But you may want to start changing your ways. Change your ways. Or changing your name.